Welcome back to the Sideshed podcast. Before we get started, last month we ran this crazy promotion over at Tradies Web Guys where we were giving away $5,500 websites to anybody that came on board as a marketing client of ours. As you can imagine, we got smashed with inquiries and many people took that up, dozens in fact. However, one thing that I didn't consider at that point was a lot of businesses came back and said, listen, our annual budget is expired because in Australia, our end of financial year is the end of June. Is there any chance we can do this, extend this into the next month? At which point I said, well, no, but now I'm thinking, in fairness, we probably should have considered that. So we are going to run this out for an extra month. So if any of you guys out there do want to claim a free $5,500 website and you have the opportunity to do so, head across to tradie.wiki/free. If you're watching this, there's the link right there. If you're listening again, tradie.wiki/free, fill the form in, and we'll go from there. Enjoy the show. In the wake of the Great Depression, which was the largest global crisis we on planet Earth have ever seen, and a crisis that occurred almost 100 years ago, there have never ever been more millionaires created off the back of it. The fact is, crisis breeds opportunity for the right people and the right businesses. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of those opportunities that you guys as tradies and contractors should be focusing on in the wake of this global COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the things that we're going to cover include why you should not subscribe to what you hear in the media. In fact, like myself, you shouldn't subscribe to any mainstream media whatsoever. We're also discussing how you can go about creating your own economy. And importantly, we're gaining the perspective from somebody in their 70s who has time and time again seen pandemics and seen global crises on different scales and has a very polarizing understanding of what you can expect in the wake of this pandemic. Brian Keane, welcome to the Sideshed podcast.
Matt, it's great to be here. Thanks very much indeed. Lovely to see you again.
Mate, it is great to be here and talk about the circle of a sales cycle, although we're not selling anything particularly. But I met you, Brian, at an event, at one of Dave Jennings' event when he was when he was with Melbourne SEO, I believe. And we were talking, and I think at that point you had just written a book called Franchise Simply. And if I had no interest in franchising my business, but I certainly had an interest in the structure that franchise businesses have from a system perspective, which I'm guessing is one of the reasons why you're at that event. And that book was brilliant. I did a review on it actually, which is on my website. So if anyone wants to go check that out, I'll post a link to it in the show notes. But it's a great little book, easy read, quick read. But yeah, really good. And then between now and then, I don't know how we came back in contact, but I know I was on your podcast recently, and now you're here on the Sideshed podcast. So it's all come full circle, mate.
Yeah, look, I think we got back in touch because somebody that contacted me about franchising their business used your advice to help their business model, and they were a electrician basically.
Sure, yeah, that's right. Actually, I think I've tried to connect you with quite a few people over the years because I don't really know anyone else to connect them to in the franchise space. So if anyone is out there interested in the franchise model, then Brian's definitely the man I can connect you with. Although we're not really here to talk about that today, are we, Brian? But in fact, I wouldn't mind doing an episode on franchising. I know we've touched on this topic over the last 6 months previously with both yourself and some colleagues and friends of ours that are both in franchise, setting up franchise businesses and that kind of thing. So I think there is an interest. I think most people have a bit of a jaded perception of what a franchise actually is. They just immediately gravitate towards McDonald's and KFC, where they don't really understand what that looks like from a trade or home service-based organization. So I think we should definitely do a follow-up podcast on that and actually get some questions answered.
Yeah, I'd love to. What is franchising? I think that seems to me like a suitable title.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the franchising and the licensing and there's all these different things, isn't there? And so many of these businesses over the years have shifted from one to the other, and some have gone out of business. And I mean, anyway, I'm sure you know more about this than me, but anyway, we're sort of here today to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that lie, post COVID, if I'm allowed to say that without getting in trouble with YouTube. But from a business perspective, some of the opportunities that might present, so on and so forth. I know you've as a mature gentleman, you've been around through a few global crises, and you're probably the first to tip your hat at the comment, "Don't never waste a crisis." So I'm pretty keen to get your take on, I suppose, what service businesses can typically look forward to from an opportunity perspective, despite all the doom and gloom that sell papers and and media slots on television, which I tend to be a little bit detuned to these days, perhaps to my disadvantage. But I'm a big believer of you build your own economy, and it hasn't done me too far wrong so far. So so anyway, welcome to the show. Maybe give us a little bit of a heads up as to you and your business. Obviously, with that strong Perth accent you've got there, that's a bit of a giveaway. But let's hear a bit about you.
Yeah, look, thanks very much indeed. And indeed, go back through a few recessions over the years. But of particular interest to me, I've been in franchising for 4 decades now. And prior to that, I was a registered builder. And I was doing building development in Perth, designing homes, building, like post offices, commercial, industrial, private, personal, all that sort of thing, homes of the year, competitions, et cetera. And that all blew up in the early 80s, long time ago, when interest rates for me for investment property was some 23%. I'll repeat that. 23%. But nevertheless, ever since I got into franchising, when I first got involved with a group called Bedford, I was a franchisee. I had 7 outlets in 5 years, so I was a bit of a sort of a
tycoon,
I suppose. I got hooked on it, and I've been passionate about it ever since. And got involved with a colleague in a recruitment business called the Franchise Alliance, and we grew from Perth to be across the country. Had half dozen of our own franchise groups, and in those days, I looked at it and I thought, franchise a building company? No, impossible. It wouldn't work. Of course, with the advent of software and so forth and what's available now, that's been proven to be totally wrong, as there many things are. Time changes, and that's one of the things, I suppose, that's relevant to your audience, particularly if they're in the building services or building area, because what I've seen now, particularly having this close relationship with building, is that there are amazing opportunities out there for trades and services across the board, and more and more and more. Back at the turn of the century, in 2000, there was a prediction that 60% of businesses in Australia would be franchised by 2050.
60%?
60%. It's staggering. Wow. But you don't realise, you think about your football codes are all franchised, Caterpillar, earth moving equipment's all franchised. It goes on. There's a lot that people don't realise. But to me, it's looking at the grassroots and simple service businesses. I mean, I worked with Jim Penman from Jim's Mowing in the early 90s, helping him set up in Western Australia. We found a state franchisor for him, got his first 8 or 10 franchisees, and he's going strong now with over 40 franchise groups. Not that I necessarily think that's the right direction, but he's doing well. But it just goes to show, what you look at as the guy down the road with a lawnmower, you think he's just, the average sort of guy, but you don't realise what the potential is with that business.
Sure.
That's what he's done. And there's others who've been the same. We'd all be familiar with Hire a Hubby. Well, Hire a Hubby started off as a lawn mowing franchise with one franchisee. So the opportunities for people that look on the entrepreneurial side in the building and services sector, I think there's opportunities. But particularly because of the advent, particularly over COVID, I mean, the use of marketing and various apps and so forth has exploded out of sight. I mean, it's stunning. When I look back to even 5 years ago, I had an electrician came here the other day. He's all geared up. He's got his iPad. It was contactless. I ticked the box when he finished the job. He was paid. I'd got an invoice, and that's it. But I think 80% of the tradespeople out there, with all due respect, they are not in that space. They don't have switched on websites, as you'd know. So, and they don't have the skill sets or the funding to do it. So there are people out there that if there's a good franchise group they can go and join, it will give them an opportunity for business in the future. Otherwise, I'm afraid they're going to drift downwards as the whole economy now accepts that we're all internet based.
Sure.
I suppose that's where I'm looking, without wanting to talk for too long.
Yeah, no, it is. It's very interesting. I've had this conversation with one of my friends, Luke, who's just recently set up a franchise business called Level Groups. He said one of the big things that a lot of business owners, like from an education perspective, people don't really understand franchise. They just think, and I think in Australia as well, we tend to have like a bit of, I don't know if it's pride or a bit of it's like probably ignorance or arrogance or all of the above in relation to, no, I want to run my own business, and I don't like that. There's this mentality, you know, where it's like, no, it's mine, it's my business sort of thing, where they don't really. I think that whole concept around franchising kind of gets a little bit lost and thrown into the bucket of working for someone else to a degree.
Yeah, there's a perception that, you are almost employed by your franchisor. You could be, for the truth. The reality is you're an entrepreneur in your own right, running a franchise group. And a term that's been used is intrapreneur or entrepreneur. In other words, within an organization, you're an entrepreneur yourself. And when you look at successful franchise groups, there's many of them. I mean, I refer often to Pool Works, for example. Now, I've known John O'Brien, who's the CEO and founder, since before he even got involved in Pool Works. He bought that with 3 vans, a little shed in Hornsby, North Sydney. Now he's got 400 to 500 vans, 70 to 80 shops across Australia, New Zealand, and he's going gangbusters in America. Franchisees who've been with him for 20 years. And I know him personally. I was chatting to him over at lunch a little while back. He said, Brian, I've not had a fresh idea for 10 years. He said, my franchisees come to me. Say, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? How about fencing? And he says, well, give it a try. So they do a model with it. And so these guys are doing far better than they would on their own. There's nothing to stop them when they join the group, and this is what franchisors or prospective franchisors are terrified of, is there's nothing to stop them leaving within meeting all the legal requirements, because they've learned how to service a swimming pool. No great deal. Most people can pick that up, but they realise the value of being in a group. That community feeling, it's that family sort of feel.
Sure.
That to me is what shook me. I said, I'm never going to have a franchise. Why should I pay somebody 5, 7, 10% when I can run my own business? And I joined Bedshed. Within weeks, I realised, I thought, shit, excuse my French, the camaraderie, the fact I can ring any of the other franchisees, ask for advice, share ideas. We were a team. Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think like business is quite a lonely journey, when you when you look at it in reality, like, you don't really have a lot of people you can turn to, especially people you can trust and people that are going to give you, information and insight that's not biased in some way, try to sell something or push it, push a certain thing. So I think that whole franchise model is great. I mean, just being able to walk into a system that has all of the different parts already in place. I mean, you can't really, I mean, don't get me wrong, some of them obviously are running a lot better than others. But I mean, I think for a lot of people out there, it really would be a smart option to consider. I mean, we know companies that have been established for 30 years and have then taken on a franchise brand. Like, it's like if people like that are doing it, it really makes you think they must know, they obviously know what they're doing, But anyway.
It's interesting what you just said. I think, is a bit of stubbornness and pride about doing it yourself, not wanting to feel you're relying on somebody else.
And ignorance and arrogance. Don't forget that part of it.
Yeah, it's the inverse, really, of the tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah. It's a very Australian thing, I find. Like, you see, and I don't know, perhaps it's part of the system we're brought up in when you're doing a trade certificate. You get your license and then you're like, right, now go start a business. Like, at no point has anyone showed you how to start a business, run a business, send an invoice, like none of this stuff. Like, it's all like, you got to go and figure that out, So, but you're allowed to. So, in truth, it's straight up negligence, like from the bodies that issue these licenses. Like when you look at it in hindsight, but it is what it is. So,
classic example there. I was a founding director of a pharmacy franchise group, and before we were sort of taken out of the picture, we grew. But the reality is, 90% of the people that go and study pharmacy at university want to run their own pharmacy. They did not at that stage, I'm talking about in the early 2000s, did not have an hour of business training in their degree. I mean, and I think this is common across the board with business training of all different sorts, professional and, as you say, trade certificates and so on. So there's an expectation you can run your own business. It ain't easy.
Yeah, that's right, and it's and it's lonely, and and there's few, as I said before, you've got to get the right people in your corner, which is probably the biggest thing. I mean, when I look back in hindsight in my business, like if I had the right people in my corner from the beginning, like I would have been 5-6 years ahead from where I am now, probably just based on the fact that I had to go learn it myself and through school of hard knocks, and
Yeah.
that's, and then obviously you've got, there's people out there that can help, there's coaches and there's consultants and there's all these kind of things. But I mean, even some of the experiences with some of those are jaded, so you've really got to get the right people in your corner. So I think a good franchise kind of ticks those boxes, doesn't it? Like it sort of has, well, hopefully, answers to all those questions from the get-go.
Well, one of the biggest things is, particularly these days when things are so technical, I mean, legislation around work, I mean, look at Fair Work and all the compliance requirements with the ACCC and fair trading. It goes on. For a small business person to comply with that stuff is absurd. You end up having to employ a very expensive employment agency to do that for you. So why not join an organization where you can stand on their shoulders? They've done all that, and they just basically give you access to the outcome.
Well, let's get off this topic and get on the one we're here to speak about, because we could go on for days like this, but I definitely want to do a follow-up podcast and speak a little bit more to the franchise model, just so we can dispel some of the myths and cast a bit of clarity across that whole dynamic. But so, I mean, we're here today to talk about some of these opportunities, that the tradespeople, contractors, whatever, can sort of see, in the wake of the global pandemic that we're, I think it's fair to say we're kind of exiting now. Like I was up on the Gold Coast the other day having lunch, and all the restaurants were full, and it seemed seemingly like everything was getting back to normal. So, which is good to see. But obviously, there are things that that people need to consider. Some businesses have been very largely affected, and whether it's a global pandemic or a global crisis, whatever it might be, we've seen global financial crises before. We've seen recessions. We've seen all these things before. So I'm pretty keen to hear, like, I suppose, your feedback as to what are some of those common trends, that people can expect to see coming into these things and coming out of. But I have a bit of an opinion as well, but probably nowhere near the depth that you do. So, I mean, obviously there's like the trade, a lot of trade businesses, they got hit hard. They had to shut down operations. Then when they were able to open, they're experiencing things that they never thought was going to be an issue, like material shortages and all these, kind of things, which is, it's just like, seems like one rolling thing after another. I mean, I dare say inevitably that is going to plane out and things are going to get relatively back to normal, albeit with a bunch of different new processes and probably more obligations from both parties involved. But regardless, you can kind of expect those things to level out, I would expect.
Yeah, I agree. So, but what I think is changing is a huge paradigm shift. There's a huge transition across the community in attitudes to things and so forth. And there's a whole number of things that are impacted there. The fact that I think the reason I believe there's so many opportunities for people who've got a good service or building business at the moment is that the market has been stimulated for demand for their products. And that's going to carry on because, there will be a sudden halt happening now to the boom in the property market, but people have suddenly got heaps of equity in their home. They've certainly got 100 or 200,000 up their sleeve they can spend. They're not going to move because that's going to be the end of that sort of current cycle for 5 to 7 years, but they can do the house up. So there's a huge market across all the trades you can think of, because it covers everything from roof repairs and repaints down to checking down dampness under the house, all those sorts of things. Yeah. Right? So there's demand for that. And the other thing is, a lot of areas, a lot of service businesses don't require a significant amount of skill. They can be taught. If you've got a business and you can offer a good cleaning business model, for example, almost anybody, providing they're fit and healthy, can actually be taught and run that business successfully. There's a huge number of people, if you look at people in hospitality, people in airlines, we all heard about people leaving those jobs and actually enjoying working from home, enjoying the freedom of working even in Woolies, stacking the shelves. And they said, you know what? I don't want to go back to what I used to do. I want to do something else. Well, those people have been sitting on the sidelines for the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. But as we come up the time of uncertainty now, we've got political stability. Okay, there are changes. There's going to be some increases in interest rates and that sort of thing. But the great migration is something that we've all seen talk about. And I think it's starting from what I can see. And by the end of this year, it's going to be quite significant.
Sure.
So people out there. And I look back to 92, 93, a long time ago, 30 years ago, but very, very similar situation. What happened then was there was a rush of people to go into their own business. They decided they'd had enough of working for someone else. They didn't want to have someone else controlling their future. They wanted to also prove to themselves that they could do it. There's that
pride.
It's the control thing. It's a human thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You want to control your destiny. So there's a huge opportunity. There's going to be people out there looking to buy businesses anywhere from $50,000 to $1 million, $1.5 million, depends on their background. So cater for that marketplace.
I've been doing a lot of research into this lately, just through listening to different books and podcasts and things like that. And shout out to Charlie over at Full Stack Business Owner, who you actually know. He was the MC at that event that we met at. But like they were saying in one of their podcasts recently, some of the regional areas, like there's no question the building construction industry is going to go through a massive spike. Like it already is. We're seeing it already. And even those guys over at Full Stack were first to admit, if you guys are in the construction or if you're in the any sort of home service space, regardless whether it's actually swinging hammers or building websites like we do or whatever, then you're going to be in a good spot. But they were saying, some of the trends that you can expect to see are where, like with this whole new working remotely sort of way that businesses have been starting to operate. Now you can start to see a lot of opportunity in these areas that are kind of outside of the main hubs, like in 1 or 2 hour drive of the major cities, things like that. So, that obviously means there's going to be a lot of building, a lot of construction, a lot of, renovations and all this kind of stuff. And it's basically enabling people to live in locations that they actually want to live in because they no longer need to be where they were. And of course, there's on the flip side of that, we're starting to see a bit of a clawback to, people coming back into the office. You're seeing some of the big companies already doing it. Like I think Elon Musk, I don't know if you saw that tweet he sent out the other day, but he said, our employees are more than welcome to work from home after they'd work 40 hours in the office. So there is a bit of a trend, something like that anyway. So anyway, some of these corporations are starting to pull people back into the office. But I would imagine that it's never going to be the same for regular small business. Like there's always going to be that work from home element and that level of flexibility that people now are, I suppose, are open to and also starting to get very conditioned to, and they want, So it is tricky. Like I think the issue from a small business perspective becomes, or how you how you process that side of it to make sure that your productivity doesn't drop. But that's a slightly different conversation. But, in terms of, the construction and building industry, like there's going to be these huge opportunities in these regional areas, or I mean, I don't even know if you'd call them regional, but like just not in the main cities, which are going to start taking off all over the place,
Oh, absolutely. Look, that was the reason we were very lucky in the 90s with two business partners by that stage. And we actually, in that period of 92, 93, started three of our own franchise groups. We hadn't been that smart that we anticipated the expansion of the growth of people looking to buy businesses, but they took off. Absolutely took off. Yeah. And I suppose I'm using that experience and then seeing what happened as well after the GFC was the most recent one, 2007, 8, 9. But it's the other factor that people forget. There's going to be a lot of businesses closing down. After the GFC, 638,000 businesses closed down in the 2 years, 9 and 10.
And why is that?
Well, because they were no longer feasible.
Right.
There was a rush of people starting their own businesses. There have been in the last couple of years. People say, COVID, let's start a business. But a lot of those aren't going to succeed. It's just technical, too driven. They don't have the marketing skills. Sure. Sales is no longer what sales used to be. It's not sales anymore. It's being there to answer people's questions and actually help them. And so the opportunities are vast. If you're service oriented, you know how to run a business and you're prepared to invest a little bit of capital, there's going to be a groundswell of people out there looking for businesses. The other thing is, there's going to be a vast number of businesses closed down. A lot at the moment, you walk through the shopping centre, you look down the high street, there are businesses there that are closing down now, end of lease. A lot of them are hanging on. And what's going to happen is they're going to close and there's going to be nobody to take their place. So these people, they may have run a retail business, maybe they had maybe they had a furniture store, who knows? But they are used to being in their own business. So they're going to say, okay, I've got to find another business. So they'll buy something smaller. And that's an opportunity for franchising. So if you're tuned, you've got some ambition to grow your business, I think now is probably the best time almost in your lifetime, certainly in a decade.
The thing is with a trade business, like whatever crisis hits, like it doesn't matter. They still need to, pitch roofs and clear block drains, don't they? Like it's not like you can, from a trade business, you can have your team working from home. You're always going to be busy. There's always going to be work that needs to be done, building things and repairing things. So, it's almost, obviously it's subject to, some of the elements that you would see in things like recessions, which we'll talk about a little bit, because there's talk of, heading into a recession. But then when we break that down, like even that alone often presents in a lot of opportunities, and people sometimes see these things as doom and gloom, where those of us that have been around for a little while think, great, here comes another opportunity, So I think it's really important that people don't subscribe to the sentiment that you see coming across these media platforms, because they're trying to sell freaking papers. That's what they do. Like they're doom and gloom. So, but anyone that's been around for 20 years in business or, 10 years, even anyone that's survived through COVID, you guys know the reality, to a degree, you are in control and you can either subscribe to that shit that you hear. I'm not saying disregard it, but you don't have to take it for gospel. There's things that you can do to create your own economy and make yourself, coast through these things relatively unscathed. And again, we're obviously in Australia and we coast through most things relatively unscathed when you look in the greater scheme around the world. But still, ask the right questions and, make educated decisions, and don't just, I say to you guys that are watching this, just because you read it somewhere, it doesn't mean it's your reality. It might be someone's reality, but it doesn't have to be yours. So don't subscribe to it. Brian, I gave up reading papers and watching the news 12 years ago. And I haven't picked one up since, because I was fed up with it. It was all shit and none of it made any difference to me. Instead, now I read business books and listen to podcasts and things like that. And I can tell you which one's been more beneficial, if anything is paramount, if anything's going to happen on a governmental scale, you're going to hear about it. There's no question, but all the other shit, just treat it like that, That's my advice.
Look, what you're saying is interesting because if you check back in history, even from the Great Recession in the 1930s, that during those periods of time, and the GFC was the same, more millionaires and billionaires were made during that period of time than any other.
Right.
Cowan from Hungry Jack's, who also owns Domino's, by the way. I mean, he got behind Domino's and funded it for the growth just around the end of the GFC.
Right.
They went absolutely bananas on digital.
Yeah, technology, that's right.
Something like from Australia, they now have the franchise in something like 12 or 15 countries for Domino's. They're the leading one in the world, and they just dominate the market. Pizza Hut right on their tails because
I remember reading, I don't know if it was in a book or something, and it was talking about the Domino's franchise and how how they essentially went from being a pizza business to becoming a technology business that delivers pizza. And I said this on a podcast only the other day, actually, how like love it or hate it, the pizza, like the product itself, that's I suppose subject to, you know, your own tastes and whatever, but like that you will not get a better experience from from ordering to delivery than using the Domino's app. It is incredible. Like, and in truth, I'm sometimes and often happy to substitute the quality that you might get down the road at a different shop just so I can go through the experience again because I freaking love it. It's epic. So it's a very interesting shift and a credit to, I suppose, what you said earlier in the conversation around, you know, businesses that are adopting different technologies and things like that to be better, you know, in these situations. And when when COVID, I think it was after the first lockdown, I did an interview, I think it was with the Sydney Morning Herald, and the lady asked me, "Oh, what do you think is going to happen here to trade businesses in this global pandemic?" And after I said it, I immediately kind of regretted it, and I thought, "Oh, this is going to come back and backlash me. I shouldn't have said this." But I basically said, "Oh, well, I think the right businesses are going to do very well out of it, and businesses that want to sit there with their hand out and read into all the doom and gloom are probably going to fizz out, and to a degree that's kind of what happened. And of course that wasn't always the case, and different businesses were affected in different ways, but you see these situations where all of a sudden we had these businesses that were like, okay, we can either shut down how we're doing things, or now we can figure out how to run a faceless, or what do they call it? Like no more face-to-face transactions, contactless, home service business, bang, opportunity, you know, competitors. So they started evolving into this thing and adopting these processes and creating these systems. And all of a sudden these businesses just started going bang, they just took off and used this crisis as an opportunity. And you see it time and time after again with it seems like every crisis there's businesses out there that just look at it and they go, okay, well, this is the greater picture. And this is where this is what's going to have to happen to make this work. Let's go do that. And all of a sudden, you know, things start to flourish.
Look, a fantastic example of that. One of my clients is a member of our franchise program. So we're franchising in business. 2.5 years ago, he had a building construction business, which he started 10 years back. Suddenly, everything went black, you know, with COVID. And he started up a business selling kits.
Kits?
Kits. K-I-T-S, kits. Kits for carports, kits for verandas, kits for decks, and so on and so forth. It's gone absolutely bananas. He does not now leave the office. He gets everything made up and packed by a third-party supplier, delivered to the site, and he's got installers around the country, but mainly it's people doing it for do it yourself.
That's great.
He doesn't. I don't think he sees a bag of cement anymore. Well, I know he doesn't. You know, it's extraordinary. So he just happened to be someone who saw that particular opportunity, but he fell into it by luck. He was desperate to keep a company staff. He's now doubled his staff. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You know, they're out there.
So what do you, I mean, let's touch a little bit on, like, obviously interest rates are going up, and like some people are seeing this as a I mean, I suppose people that are highly leveraged, it is kind of a scary thing. I mean, the reality is it had to happen. There was no, we could not go on with it like that. It was getting beyond a joke. So is it going to, will it end up in like a recession? Okay, well, perhaps, but then like, let's define what the recession actually is. Like, it's never going to be like a depression. It's never going to be a great recession. It's going to be one of these technical recessions or whatever they call it, which essentially is just there to bring interest rates back to where it needs to be, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, look, as you said earlier, it's so much a mindset thing. We become paranoid about all we hear, whether it's papers, whether it's online, whether it's the television news, whether it's television feature programs. It's all about, the recession, depression, what's going to happen next, doom and gloom. Having traded through 5 or 6 of these, you just push on and you work, okay, it might be a bit quieter than other times, but if you're looking at in the building area, and we haven't even mentioned the fact that the gates are about to open for immigration again.
Yeah.
Imagine what 180,000 people a year coming in.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know, 70 to 100,000 families.
And then also, in regard to that is all of a sudden there's going to be, talent available. Like, there's this huge problem right around the world at the moment with actually sourcing talent for the business, like no one can find staff. No. And all of a sudden, that problem is going to get less and less significant, as we open up these gates more. So yeah, I mean, that's, and of course they've got to live somewhere. So, like houses, construction, like everything starts, basically.
It goes right the way through, doesn't it? They used to say that for every new immigrant, it created something like 8 jobs.
Right.
They come into the country. There's various services they need from the bank.
Sure. They drink coffee, they eat food, they
need medical services, and then when they get a home, they've got to buy bedding and carpets and
exactly,
etc. The light, and they got to get a television aerial put up, and name it. The list is so long.
I am very curious to see what happens in the space of like qualified work, and obviously as tradespeople, you've got to go through and you've got to get certified, and over the years that certification has been more and more reduced, by bodies like TAFE and that kind of thing. For better or worse, I tend to lean to the latter, in truth. But I mean, I suppose the reality is people are going to need labor. They're going to need skilled labor. I'm very curious to see, what shifts, from a business perspective in the space of certification and then skilling up labor internally, so while they go and do their certs or whatever, but really putting that bigger emphasis on training programs so that you can basically train people into your organization and ecosystem. I mean, you see it in America all the time. Like, companies are doing this religiously. And over here, it's not so evident. But then again, here there's a lot more jurisdiction over licensing and qualifications and that kind of stuff, within the trade. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
Look, but there's opportunities. I ran a building business. I do not have a trades background, but I employed people. I've got a business partner who did have a trades background, and that's the opportunity here. If you're business oriented, you can see the opportunities. You can either employ someone or get someone as a shareholder in the business to join you. Got those skills that can tick the boxes for the authority. So if you've got my point is, if you've got the ambition, back yourself and get out there. And, there are people like yourself. There's numerous organizations, companies there to help you with all these different areas that you can't expect to understand, whether it's IT or marketing and branding. Don't try and draw your own logos. Don't try and create your own website. Go to someone who can do it for you and make it work every time. And, providing you a modest amount, I think the opportunities are there.
So I suppose going back to, things like rising interest rates, like what can we see as a result of this? Like, from the perspective of a trade business owner?
Well, I think interest rates are going to increase.
Continue to increase.
About 40 mature age businessmen last night, and the general consensus was within a couple of years' time, interest rates were about 2.5%. That's what they think. Now, these are guys who've been through these things before. I think it's probably going to be a smidgen more than that, but still, you say it's going to affect people's pockets, but in reality, when you look at people's disposable income, what is it really?
Sure.
Once a week for dinner, not twice a week.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this morning, like because the interest rate obviously went up again. Was it yesterday? 0.5% or something like that. And they put that into context. I think it was a mortgage worth $750,000. The mortgage repayments has essentially gone up an extra $500 a month, something like that. Now that is, I suppose, like you say, like $500 a month sounds like a lot of money, but then when you put it into perspective of all the other stuff that people are, spending money on, it might just mean you need to reallocate some of your priorities, or whatever it is. So I guess a lot of like the thing that I see potentially is concerning is like with this huge prop. And I'm by no way you don't want any sort of advice from me whatsoever in relation to finance or investing or whatever. I'm by no way qualified, but with all these people that have gone through this property boom in some of these capital areas, and even up here where we live in the Northern Rivers, like in the last 2 years, property values have like doubled. And you just think like it's insane. Like people are just all of a sudden somehow managing to get these, $2-3 million mortgages. And I'm guessing it's pretty much interest only sort of repayments, but like they're going to be feeling the crunch on it. So I'm wondering, well, then how does that ripple down into, the businesses that are going to be building these homes and servicing these homes? Is there going to be less money available? Will they still be investing in these things? Do they just find the money? Like, what does that look like traditionally in the past?
Yeah, look, I think there is a bit of a shake. There's a bit of a shake up as well. I think values will settle back a little bit. But the reality is, the majority of people, unemployment's what, just under 3%. You look at the average wage in Australia, despite the fact, lots of moaning about the average weekly wage only being whatever it is. I'm ignorant enough not to repeat the figure. I'm not absolutely sure. But the reality is most people that are in any sort of position of skill, whether it's from a trades point of view or a professional point of view, whatever it might be, running their own business, they're earning a good salary. Sure. And they can sidestep these issues. It's not going to change people's ambitions and determination, because at the end of the day, we've all got that drive.
I mean, and if anything else, it's one of those situations where all those people that are sort of subject to that fear mongering out there and those tactics, and you see this all the time in a crisis. Take property, for example, like, okay, now's the time to sell or whatever while the property's high. And of course, people that, like sort of tend to ebb when everyone else flows, sort of, okay, well, now's a good time to buy property. It's the Warren Buffett sort of mentality, buy when everyone's selling, sell when everyone's buying kind of mentality. Like, it makes you wonder how that's going to play out with, across the board with all these different things, and businesses being one of them. If people like freaking out, oh my God, I got to sell my business because this is what I heard in the paper, read in the paper the other day. Well, okay, like there'd be a lot of people out there would be looking, like you said earlier, as this is a great time to go and buy a business.
Yeah, look, if you're in business, take a breath. Don't panic in any of those situations. Speak to advisors. If you haven't got advisors, get some. You need to have 2 or 3 people around you.
Sure.
Good sound business experience, maybe a business coach, an accountant that understands business.
Yeah.
Not just tax, but business, and understand implications, and then get their counsel and determine what to do. So, but the reality is, it is taking advantage of those opportunities, and we're going to see more people, like we saw the story with Domino's that you were repeating earlier, happening with other businesses. And this client of ours, with his building business, has gone remote with that. There's going to be more and more of that type of thing, and these people are going to drive the market. So, the reality is, every 10 years, virtually all the businesses in the top 100 businesses on the stock exchange, something like 80% of them disappear.
Is that right?
BHPs and so on remain, although a lot of those disappear because they merge.
Right.
But the reality is that businesses are coming and going all the time, but we see things we see them in slow motion. We see them as now.
Right.
If you step back and look at them over a period of time, you can cast your eye back and say, why didn't I buy that block of land up the road? Why didn't I do this? And John O'Brien from Paulworks, he launched in America. It's gone gangbusters because what he's found is over there, people aren't as well systemized as they are in Australia. And he's really doing very, very well. But he said, I should have gone over there 15 years ago.
Sure.
I was hesitating. It was that fear thing. I wasn't sure what to do. But I knew what I know now. I knew then. I could have done it just as easy. I missed the opportunity of a lifetime.
Hindsight, eh?
Oh, I'm telling you.
Yeah, I agree. That whole time sample size thing is, I mean, geez, how much have you heard about that lately in relation to things like climate change? Like people are like, oh, the last 10 years, waters have risen, temperatures have risen, all this stuff. Okay, but if you look at like the scale of the last 1,000 years, then we sometimes just get caught in these little, like you said, these micro time.
I mean, I do believe that there is an impact from global warming. There's going to be a lot of tears in a few years when people realise, going on just to electric cars, that's all fine, but you know what? The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. We're really having given away all that gas, but there you go. That's life.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the thing, I suppose. Like, there's so many different opinions out there, understanding what's right in relation to that sort of stuff, which we're not going to go into today, because although it's probably would be a very good topic of conversation, I'm sure. But so anyway, getting back to, I suppose, this whole, opportunity conversation in the wake of, I mean, I'm a firm believer that, in truth, like what we saw with a global pandemic, in terms of, okay, there's recessions and there's global financial crisis, that kind of stuff. I feel like that is something that's always going to repeat and is quite familiar. Like it works in cycles, Global pandemics was, in truth, like that. That was the first time that most of us have ever experienced anything like that. And from a fear perspective, I think that was probably way scarier than us heading into a technical recession, and I reckon, in truth, that if you survive, the global pandemic, then what we're looking at here is just going to be a walk in the park and just present even more opportunity.
You're absolutely right. Look, it's like being a footballer, having gone through the academy and played in all the country leagues, and gone over and done a bit in Europe, and suddenly you've matured. You've been there. You've done it. And at the moment, as you say, if you've been through COVID and survived, then frankly, you're not going to experience the likes of that again, in all probability. You've got your you've got your tick of honor. You've got your honors degree in survival, and you can go out there and do it. Because, as you made a very interesting comment. You said, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you build your own economy. The expression you made.
Yeah.
And that, to me, nails it. Absolutely. You get on and do it. Just be focused.
Yeah, I mean, I've said that numerous times over the years. Create your own economy. It's so easy, and it was that point really where I decided to stop consuming mainstream media and just focus on what I'm doing, because it's never ever, whatever I've read in any paper or heard on the news. And I'll be honest, even in relation to COVID, like all that, like my parents are freaking terrified about COVID. And, I didn't subscribe to any of that stuff. And I know it exists, don't get me wrong, but it never became my reality. And like, I'm not talking about the fact of getting COVID, like that's irrelevant. I'm just saying the whole hype around it, like, was it really what it was hyped up to be? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, some would argue yes. Some have been very badly, affected by it. But I mean, for the better part, as a percentage, I don't know, probably not. All these. So again, like, you can subscribe to this stuff and listen to what you hear, or you could just sit back and observe and just think about it and do what is going to serve you best, and see which plays out better.
Absolutely, you probably know. Our brains consume 80% of our energy, right? So the food you eat, the energy, you think it's out there with a shovel digging a hole in the ground is using all your energy. Forget it, mate. It's your brain. Your brain is consuming energy 24/7. And the reality is, if you're paranoid about something and you keep worrying and thinking about it, hang on, it's churning over in your brain.
You're fueling it, yeah.
Round and round, it's still consuming the diesel. And that's exactly what you're doing. So the likes of, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, when it comes to dress sense, you think they're pretty square. But do you know why he wears a black T-shirt?
So he doesn't have to think about it.
Steve Jobs says, I want to focus on what I'm doing creatively in the early days of Apple.
Mm-hmm.
I just wear the same shirts. I've got a dozen of them. I wear the same jackets, the same trousers and shoes. I don't have to think about what I'm going to wear.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a silly example, but it's so silly that you remember it.
Well, it's exactly right. There's a fantastic book called Atomic Habits, and I encourage everyone to go read that by James Clear. You've got it right in front of you. I mean, it really does. It speaks to some of these things that you can drive into your beliefs and the way you operate. And in truth, I've got to go back and I've just started listening to it again for about the 50th time, because I know I need to make some significant shifts with perhaps not so much on the business side of things, but certainly like I'm going to get my training back up to speed, and like little things that I know it's just a result of bad habits. Like it's just lacking and lack of discipline in certain areas, but like you can be in charge of these things, and like, and if you want a certain result from your business, and I'd say this, like in closing for this podcast, for you guys out there that are watching this or listening to this, and I've said this a billion times on the program before, take the time to think, like just sit down for an hour and say, okay, well, where do I want to be in 2 years? And reverse engineer that journey down to the month. And I tell you right now, you cannot spend more valuable time than that. And if you're not doing that regularly, you are kidding yourself, and it's your own demise, because there is so much value you can pull out of just sitting down with a pen and a notepad and just reverse engineering that journey. Like, you will be amazed when you put things into perspective and you break these things down, these huge objectives. Like, you could say, I want to have a business worth $10 million in 2 years, like say something insane. When you reverse engineer that down to monthly actions, you will fall off your chair when you learn how little you have to do to achieve that goal. It's just a habit.
1% a day.
Exactly. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And there's some amazing examples in that book you mentioned.
Atomic Habits.
Yeah. I mean, my advice is just do exactly what you say. We're all bad when it comes to discipline and those sorts of things. We look after our businesses and lots of other things more than we do ourselves, our business interests, if you like. We're just keeping the wheels turning. So you do need a business coach, I think, or somebody, a mentor to refer to keep you accountable.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we can all pass up an excuse on a Friday and say, I'll do it next week.
Yeah, I'll just go to the pub now, but I'll do it in the morning, that kind of thing. Yeah. All right, mate. Well, this has been great. And again, I'd love to maybe have another conversation in relation to the whole, like what a franchise business actually is, and to spell a few of those myths there. If any of you guys out there that are watching this or listening to this, if you have any questions or if you have any experiences with some opportunities and things like that you might have seen present themselves, either coming into COVID or coming out of it, like we'd love to hear what they were. We'd love to hear how you navigated those and how you built a stronger process around whatever that was. And I'm sure the audience would love to hear them as well. So please hit me up in the Facebook group. If you're not over there, head across to the Site Shed. It's a private Facebook group. Go join. It's free. Lots of conversations happening in there, and you can get hold of me through there as well. And when this podcast goes live, it'll just post your comments or your opinions or whatever within that thread, and we'd love to hear them. Brian, thanks so much for your time. Look forward to getting you back on the show in the future. What is the best place? Oh, actually, before we bid farewell, I would encourage you guys to go out there and get hold of Brian's book. It's called Franchise Simply. Oh, there you go. Jeez, you got all these books at your fingertips. This is amazing. It's a very small book, but the reason that I read this book, guys, was because I wanted to, and I still, I'm on an avid, ongoing quest to better process my business and create better systems within my business. And if you look at a franchise business model, it's essentially a collation of systems. And so that's the reason why I read Brian's book, and it was great. It's a short read. I think I read it in, like, honestly, 3 hours or something over a glass of wine, a few glasses of wine. I remember distinctly, I was in the Barossa with my mate Ross, and I sat down there with a couple of glasses and read it, and I read it, and it was incredible. But yeah, go and get hold of the book. Where do they get that, Brian? Is it on Amazon or?
You can pay for it, but don't pay $15.95. Go to my website, franchise.com.au, and fill in the details, and I'll happily send you a free copy.
What is it? Franchise what?
It's how to franchise.
No, what's the website?
How to franchise my business simply.
What's the website?
Website, franchisesimply.com.au.
Franchisesimply.com.au.
Just Google Brian Keane, you know. But I might also add, you mentioned there about being systemized. The truth is, 30% of the people come to us say, look, I don't want a franchise, but I want a business that looks like a franchise.
Right.
Like a franchise.
Sure.
A business that runs like clockwork. So the reality is, it's one and the same thing, which is why our other business, Systems to Grow, just focuses on helping businesses get systemized so the owners can actually have a break.
Yeah, interesting.
Employ people and stop doing it all yourself.
I suppose it's one of those things, isn't it? Like if you're talking about scale, like you've got to have these things, these processes in place to facilitate that. And I think so many, like I see so many business owners dropping the ball on the comprehension of that. Like if you want to get something to scale, you've got to remove yourself from it for that to happen. Otherwise you'll always have to be there to do that thing, whatever that looks like, you know? And so, yeah, I definitely encourage you guys to go check that out and get in Brian's space. I'll put links to all of his websites in the show notes for this episode. So head across there to the siteshow.com, search Brian Keane, and you'll see, well, first of all, you'll see his book review. Then second, you should see, you'll get links to the podcast with the show notes. Anything else, Brian?
No, I really enjoyed our conversation, and thanks very much indeed for the time and everybody there. So I'll get some envelopes ready, get my books ready to be sent.
Absolutely. Prepare for the onslaught.
Yeah,
all right. Well, listeners, that's a wrap. Thanks again, and we look forward to chatting to you in an upcoming podcast. Ciao. To get notified of our upcoming podcast, hit subscribe and turn your notifications on. We create a lot of this awesome content, and we'd love for you to get your hands on it. Please share this content with someone else. We'd much appreciate that. And if you've got any feedback or any experiences about what we're talking about, post it in the comments below.